The Atlanta conference had been a whirlwind of presentations, networking, and lukewarm coffee. As Andre Phillips navigated the familiar roads toward home, all he craved was the simple solace of his own space. He imagined the steam rising from a therapeutic shower, the cool embrace of his pool water against his skin, and the quiet hum of relaxation enveloping his senses. Leaving the city limits, he pressed a button programmed into his car and smiled as he imagined the garage door opening, but it wasn't to be. Instead, the anticipated serenity began to unravel as he pulled into his driveway. A sense of unease washed over him. The smart lock on his front door refused to cooperate, flashing a persistent error message. The garage door, usually obedient with a click of a button, remained stubbornly shut. Frowning, Andre fumbled for his keys, an archaic method in this age of technological convenience. But even the physical key met resistance, refusing to turn in the lock. A wave of frustration began to build, layered on top of his exhaustion. Then, the silence shattered. A muffled thumping sound reached his ears, growing louder as he listened. It wasn't the rhythmic bass of a distant car stereo. This was closer, emanating from within his property. It was music, loud and insistent, accompanied by the unmistakable cacophony of children's shrieks and the splashing of water. A knot formed in Andre's stomach. Something was profoundly wrong. He abandoned the recalcitrant front door and cautiously made his way around the side of the house, anticipation and trepidation fighting for control. What he saw when he rounded the corner nearly caused him to stumble backward in disbelief. His backyard, his carefully curated oasis of calm, had been transformed into a chaotic, swirling vortex of activity. Balloons bobbed in the air, tied to mismatched lawn chairs scattered across the grass. An inflatable unicorn, inexplicably, floated precariously in his pool, narrowly avoiding collision with teenagers engaged in boisterous cannonball contests. Smoke billowed from his barbecue grill, the scent of charred hot dogs replacing the subtle aroma of jasmine that usually graced his backyard. And in the very center of this surreal tableau, perched regally atop a flamingo-shaped flotation device, was Karen. Karen, the bane of his suburban existence, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics and enforcer of arcane HOA regulations. Karen, who had once lodged a formal complaint about his garden gnome, deeming it antithetical to the community's intended visual harmony. Karen, wearing oversized sunglasses, a plastic margarita cup precariously balanced in her hand, surveying the scene with an air of proprietorial satisfaction. The shock was overwhelming, bordering on the absurd. Andre felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by a bizarre detachment, like he was watching a particularly outlandish scene unfold on a reality television show. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not in his own meticulously maintained backyard. The jet lag, the overpriced coffee, the frustrations of travel. They all coalesced into a surreal fog that threatened to engulf his reason. But the sight of Karen, smug and comfortable in her unauthorized occupation of his property, snapped him back to reality. He had to do something. Fueled by a potent cocktail of indignation and disbelief, Andre plowed his way through the throng of partygoers, parting the sea of teenagers and bewildered-looking parents like a reluctant Moses. The interior of his house was just as egregious as the exterior. It was a disaster zone. Towels, damp and sandy, littered the floor like discarded confetti. Empty chip bags lay scattered across every surface, monuments to unchecked gluttony. Someone's small child wandered barefoot through the living room with a dripping ice cream cone. A pair of wet, brightly colored underwear lay forlornly on his kitchen counter, a stark violation of basic hygiene and common decency. A toddler, small and mischievous, was gleefully splashing water from his meticulously clean bathtub, turning the pristine porcelain into a murky swamp. The sound of frantic barking emanated from his guest room, where, upon closer inspection, a large, unkempt dog was tearing at the throw pillows on the bed. Each new discovery fueled Andre's simmering rage. This wasn't just a party. It was a blatant, aggressive invasion of his personal space, a violation of his sanctuary. He felt violated, his sense of security shattered. The casual disregard for his belongings, the sheer audacity of the situation, was infuriating. He navigated past a group of teenagers huddled around his dining room table, playing a loud and obnoxious card game, oblivious to the chaos surrounding them. He dodged a stray water balloon that came hurtling past his head. The whole scene felt like a grotesque parody of a family gathering, a bizarre funhouse mirror reflection of domesticity gone horribly wrong. Reaching the eye of the storm, he found Karen still perched atop her flamingo throne, sipping on her ersatz margarita, radiating an aura of unearned authority. He approached her, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Karen," he said, his tone barely above a whisper. "What in the world is going on here?" She turned to him, her sunglasses still perched firmly on her nose, as if nothing was amiss. Her expression was infuriatingly casual, as if she was doing him a favor. "Oh, Andre," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "You're back early. We were just having a little get-together." She gestured expansively at the chaotic scene around them. "I saw you leave this morning, and I just assumed you'd be gone for the whole weekend. And with everything that's been going on in the neighborhood lately, I just thought it would be great for morale to throw a little party." She paused, as if expecting him to express gratitude. "Everyone's been so stressed, and I thought a little pool time and some good company would do wonders, don't you think?" The sheer gall of her statement left Andre speechless for a moment. She had broken into his home, trashed his belongings, and hosted a full-blown rager without his permission, and she was acting as if she was doing him a favor. "Karen," he finally managed to say, his voice rising in volume, "this is my house. You are trespassing. This is breaking and entering. I am calling the police." Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. A flicker of something darker, something more calculating, flashed in her eyes. The shift in Karen's demeanor was instantaneous. The casual hostess act vanished, replaced by a hardened, almost predatory glint. Her voice, moments ago saccharine and sweet, now took on a sharp, accusatory edge. She reached for her phone with a speed that belied her relaxed pose on the flamingo float. "Oh, I don't think so, Andre," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I think I'm the one who's calling the police." Before Andre could fully process her words, she had already dialed 911. He heard the automated voice on the other end, followed by the sound of her dramatically gasping for air. "Help! I need help immediately!" she shrieked into the phone, her voice laced with theatrical panic. "There's a strange man. He's broken into this house, and he's harassing people at a children's charity pool event." Andre stared at her, dumbfounded. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was twisting the narrative, painting him as the aggressor, the intruder in his own home. "He's yelling at the children. He's being aggressive. I think he's going to hurt someone," Karen continued, her voice rising in pitch. She glanced around at the crowd, her eyes darting from face to face, as if seeking confirmation of her fabricated story. He watched in disbelief as her performance continued to unfold. "We're just trying to have a fun, safe event for the community," she wailed, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "This house was abandoned. It's been empty for months. We were just trying to bring some joy to the neighborhood." Andre felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He was standing in his own kitchen, being accused of breaking into his own house. The absurdity of the situation was almost comical, but the potential consequences were anything but. He tried to interrupt her, to explain the truth, but she simply talked over him, her voice growing louder and more hysterical with each passing moment. "Please, hurry," she pleaded into the phone. "He looks dangerous. I'm afraid for my life." He knew he had to remain calm, to not let her bait him into an argument that she could then use against him. He took a deep breath and tried to collect his thoughts. He needed to present the facts clearly and rationally when the police arrived. But the sheer audacity of Karen's lie, the blatant manipulation of the situation, made it difficult to maintain his composure. He could see the fear in the eyes of some of the partygoers, the uncertainty in their expressions. Karen was planting seeds of doubt, turning them against him. And then, the sirens began. The distant wail grew louder, closer, until it filled the air. The sound was both a relief and a source of dread. He knew the police would arrive soon, but he also knew that Karen had already poisoned the well, creating a false narrative that he would have to overcome. As the flashing lights of the police cars appeared on the street outside, Andre braced himself for the confrontation to come, knowing that he was about to enter a battle for the truth against an adversary who was willing to stop at nothing to protect herself. The arrival of the police was a spectacle in itself. Not one car, but three, screeched to a halt in front of his house, their flashing lights painting the scene in an alternating strobe of red and blue. Officers piled out of the vehicles, their expressions serious and alert. Karen, seizing the opportunity, launched into a fresh round of theatrical hysterics. Tears streamed down her face. Whether real or feigned, Andre couldn't tell. And she pointed a trembling finger in his direction. "That's him! That's the man who broke in!" she sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured distress. "He's ruining everything! He's scaring the children!" One of the officers, a young man with a stern expression, approached Andre and asked him to step outside. He complied, carefully maintaining a calm and respectful demeanor. He understood that first impressions were crucial, and he didn't want to appear defensive or aggressive. As he walked toward the front yard, he could feel the eyes of the partygoers on him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, concern, and suspicion. Karen's lies had clearly taken root. The officer asked for his identification, and Andre readily produced his driver's license. He then pulled out his phone and opened the app that controlled his smart lock. He showed the officer the activity log, pointing out that there had been no successful unlocks from his account since he had left for Atlanta. The officer examined the phone closely, his expression unreadable. Andre knew that this was just the first step in clearing his name. He needed more concrete evidence to prove that he was the victim, not the perpetrator. And then, he remembered, his security cameras. He scrolled through his phone again, accessing the live feed from the cameras that were strategically positioned around his property. He found the footage he was looking for and handed the phone to the officer. "Take a look at this," he said, his voice steady. "This will show you exactly what happened." The officer watched the footage intently, his eyes widening slightly as the story unfolded before him. There was Karen, accompanied by three unknown men, approaching his backyard fence. One of the men pulled out a pair of bolt cutters and proceeded to snip through the chain securing the gate. Then, another man climbed through the kitchen window, gaining access to the interior of the house. 2 hours later, the footage showed the group setting up a community party table, complete with a tip jar and a handwritten sign that read, "Donations appreciated." The officer went completely silent, his expression hardening. He stepped away from Andre and spoke into his radio, requesting backup and asking for a detective to be dispatched to the scene. The tide was beginning to turn. He had evidence, irrefutable proof that Karen was not just trespassing, but orchestrating a far more elaborate scheme. As the police officers reviewed the security footage, the truth about Karen's community party began to unravel. What started as a suspicion of simple trespassing quickly morphed into a full-blown investigation. Additional squad cars arrived, their sirens adding to the already chaotic atmosphere. One officer began interviewing the partygoers, while another focused on securing the scene. It didn't take long for the officers to uncover further incriminating details. One of the teenage boys at the party, visibly nervous and agitated, was identified as a runaway. Another man, who had been acting as a de facto security guard, was found to be carrying a fake ID and a small quantity of narcotics. The bartender, who had been serving drinks from a makeshift bar in Andre's garage, turned out to be a 19-year-old who had been freely dispensing alcohol to minors. The backyard transformed into a makeshift police lineup, with officers questioning individuals and documenting their findings. One officer was on the radio, coordinating with child services to ensure the safety of the children who had been left unattended at the party. The atmosphere was tense, and the initial festive mood had evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of unease and apprehension. As the investigation deepened, the officers discovered that Karen had been promoting the event online and around town, posting flyers with Andre's address that advertised an exclusive summer bash. Entry was a suggested donation of $25, and attendees were encouraged to bring their own beverages. She had even collected payments through Cash App from more than 30 people and collecting cash at the event. She was running a blatant illegal pop-up event on his property, profiting from his misfortune while he was miles away. The audacity of her scheme was staggering. The officers realized that this wasn't just a case of bad judgment or a misguided attempt to help the community. This was a calculated, premeditated act of fraud and deception. Karen had exploited his absence to turn his home into a commercial venture, profiting from the unwitting participation of unsuspecting partygoers. With each new revelation, Andre felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that the truth was finally coming to light, and anger at the sheer brazenness of Karen's actions. As the police tightened their grip on the situation, Karen's composure began to crumble. The confident, self-assured woman who had been holding court on her flamingo float was now visibly shaken, her eyes darting nervously around the yard. She knew that her carefully constructed facade was collapsing, and that she was about to face the consequences of her actions. Karen's carefully constructed facade finally shattered. The confident smirk she'd worn like armor all afternoon dissolved into a mask of panic as the weight of the investigation crashed down on her. No longer the benevolent hostess, she transformed into a cornered animal, desperate to escape the trap she had unwittingly set for herself. The officers closed in, their questions becoming more pointed, their patience wearing thin. She stammered and offered flimsy excuses, but her lies were easily disproven by the mountain of evidence the police had gathered. Suddenly, fueled by desperation and the crumbling of her carefully constructed reality, she attempted to flee. With a surge of adrenaline, she bolted towards the side gate, her flip-flops slapping against the pavement. It was a futile, almost comical effort. She sprinted towards freedom, her one-piece swimsuit riding up uncomfortably, her sun visor askew. But fate, it seemed, had a final indignity in store for her. In her haste, she tripped over one of Andre's meticulously placed sprinkler heads, sending her sprawling face first into the lush green lawn. The impact was jarring, and she lay there for a moment, stunned and disoriented, before two officers quickly apprehended her. They hauled her to her feet, her face smeared with dirt and grass, her sunglasses askew. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she was led away in handcuffs. She was cuffed in front of the entire party, still in her unflattering swimsuit and ridiculous sun visor, yelling about how Andre was destroying her reputation and that she was the victim of a racist setup. That last comment, delivered with venomous spite, proved to be her undoing. One of the officers, having already reviewed the body camera footage and heard Karen use a racial slur when referring to Andre earlier, informed her that her statement would now be subject to a federal hate crime enhancement. As she was being placed in the back of the police car, Karen continued to rant and rave, protesting her innocence and accusing everyone around her of being complicit in some grand conspiracy. But her words rang hollow, drowned out by the sirens and the murmur of the crowd. The backyard, once a scene of chaotic celebration, was now quiet and still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hum of police radios. Andre stood on his porch, watching as the last of the police cars pulled away, taking Karen and her accomplices with them. He felt a profound sense of relief, but also a deep weariness. The ordeal had been exhausting, both physically and emotionally. As he surveyed the wreckage of his home, the scattered debris, the lingering smell of chlorine and cheap beer, he knew that he had a long road ahead of him to restore his life to normalcy. But he also knew that he had prevailed. He had stood up to Karen, and he had emerged victorious. And perhaps, just perhaps, the HOA would finally get off his back about that gnome. But he knew that his world had changed one sprinkler at a time.